kick off with a report about B5 on ISN, continuing their propaganda about humans being oppressed by aliens, while Sheridan insists on watching the show. The only thing he's really learning is that Clark is trying to make the next attack look like a mission of liberation, but otherwise all he's doing is just pissing himself off. The other transmission is much better. It's Franklin giving a brief coded message updating about what's happening on Mars. Clark has already been closing his grip on the planet. If he were to be provoked into upping activities on Mars in response to a Babylon 5 presence there, it could drive the more militant factions to engage in ultimately counterproductive attacks.
There's been an explosion at the Red Planet Hotel. Took out a security force from Earth. They say it's a terrorist attack by the Resistance.
You know, like that one. It's frequently quoted, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph in the world is that good men do nothing. But the often forgotten corollary is that evil easily triumphs if good men play right into their hands by being fucking thick. Back on B5, Pharrell here explains that there's a problem. One of the races that the religious caste offered protection to are now under attack. And without the Grey Council, no one is there to make the warrior caste sort that out. I mean, seriously, look at your name. You're the living embodiment of the "you have one job" meme. After the titles, Delenn explains where she's going, and Sheridan says that it's not isolated. The Pak'ma'ra are facing similar problems. Everyone's being an asshole today. On Mars, Number 1 tears the bomber a new asshole, saying that Donovan on Earth has no business authorizing missions on Martian soil. If you're going to take a shit on the porch, at least don't do it on mine. Turns out she also used to sleep with this guy, which could color the degree to which she loses her temper, and the degree to which he enjoyed being yelled at. Sheridan may be bucking for the same thing, because after ignoring Ivanova's advice not to watch ISN because it winds him up, he's gotten wound up from watching ISN and then wakes Ivanova up in the middle of the night to talk about that fact. Mitigating this slightly is that he didn't come to complain. Well, he didn't come just to complain. He wants to bring her down to the war room. Now that the war is over, they don't really need it. I mean, yeah, there's the inevitable need to take back Earth, but that doesn't call for coordinating all these other races all over the galaxy so we can repurpose this place. The voice of the resistance. It'll be a sort of recreation of the French resistance, broadcasting 1 hour a night to tell people what was really happening. Ivanova, he says, should do that the same way that she shared updates during the war on what was happening. Well, she's about as eager for this opportunity as a gyno exam by Mr. Freeze, but Sheridan seems rather too determined for her to just say no to it. On Mars, Franklin finally has his meeting, and it's not an entirely sympathetic audience. Sheridan put down the food riots after the Earth-Minbari War, and B5 didn't break away until ships were heading their way. But Franklin and Marcus insist that Sheridan is assembling a coalition to move against Clark, and that's the reason they're here, to bring them into that. What makes that a harder selling point is that B5's goal isn't to destroy EarthGov, but rather to restore it to what it was before Clark turned it into a dictatorship. Problem is, a lot of these people weren't too keen on EarthGov before, especially the Martians. Even Marcus gets where they're coming from, considering how the only response from EarthGov to the corporate exploitation of his colony was, "Keep up the good work. Oh, and I think we'll raise some taxes, too." But trying to settle old scores will only undermine the greater threat that Clark's dictatorship represents. So bombing civilian targets needs to stop, Franklin says. Because Sheridan told him to pass that along. Yeah, definitely. Also, B5 will ensure that there is an independent Mars when this is all over. No more Earth control. If you can't even run your own planet without fucking it up, you really shouldn't be in charge of another one anyway. Meanwhile, Delenn and her White Star fleet are on the way, and Pharrell fills her in on more of the bad news. Without the unity that the Grey Council had provided, it's led to stories of the warrior caste forcing the religious caste from their cities out into the wastes.
Descartes says when there is good news, we always ask if it is true, because it is so difficult to believe. But when there is bad news, we rarely inquire because it is so easy to believe.
In my experience, there's nothing wrong with expecting bad news. All you're doing is extrapolating from all previous data points. Eventually, they arrive at their destination, finding Pak'ma'ra being attacked. It halts for the moment when they arrive, and Lanier cautions Delenn to, don't make the same mistake that started the Earth-Minbari War. Please. The aliens call themselves the Drakh and are responding in Minbari.
But how can that be? Unless they've had some prior contact with our people.
Do not move, Delenn.
I realize how stupid this gun looks, but I assure you it's still dangerous. He is doing this so that she will listen to the aliens before doing anything rash. I mean, I realize attacking unprovoked ships looks bad out of context. Meanwhile, on Mars, Number 1 says they've all decided to go along with Sheridan's plan, despite the potential risk of it. Oh, and also the fact that Franklin was improvising when he brought up the bombings. There was no way Sheridan could have told him about that because he wouldn't have known about it. ISN is keeping their mouths shut because they don't want to encourage more of them. Stop exploding, you're only encouraging them. Speaking of encouragement, Marcus says that Number 1 clearly likes Franklin, and he should consider that. In a war, that is a nice comfort to have.
Oh, Franklin, I almost forgot. Since it was your hotel that was bombed this morning, you're on your own. Maybe you'd like to join me for dinner tonight.
Yeah, it's time for Dr. Smooth to make his move. Meanwhile, the White Star Fleet and the Drakh ships have reached their destination, a mothership which sends out a vessel to dock with them.
I feel so funky.
The living Blur heads to see Delenn, while Forel explains that the rumors are true. His family died because the warrior caste drove them out, and they were unable to make it to the next city before exposure did them in. The Drakh are the answer to him, because the threat of outside fleets will force the warrior caste to finally see reason. Forel explains that he only pulled the gun so that Delenn could truthfully say that she was brought here against her will, should it be necessary for her to disavow this action, but he's sure that she'll see it as the right one. They're going to save them in Minbari, and the Drakh only want to settle on some worlds near their space because they just lost their home. You know, like all of those who had just fled from Zahadum. And they hadn't been on that planet because they just needed to crash on the couch either. They were servants of the shadows, and now they have grand ambitions for power and revenge. So thanks for that, Forel. Dick. As soon as that emissary from the Drakh departs, the warships move in. They're going to kill Delenn for bringing an end to the war, and they're going to send along the rest of the White Star Fleet to keep her company. They're only holding back right now to make sure the mothership isn't damaged in the fight. But if the White Star Fleet tips its hand by trying to open a jump point, or trying to haul ass out of there, they'd blow them up and buff out the dings on their mothership later on, I guess. So Lanier programs a maneuver that Delenn suggests into their computer so that it can execute it because no one here has the 5 years of training on how to do it without them all dying. They skim the mothership long enough to get up to maximum speed and make some jump points, though not everybody makes it. Forel is mortally wounded, apologizing. As well he should. This is the third worst diplomatic meeting ever. Delenn is quite peeved, especially because White Star 16 was destroyed. And so rather than fleeing once they've escaped into hyperspace, she launches a counterattack, taking out the smaller craft as well as the mothership as it tries to flee through the jump gate. A victory over one enemy, but all of this makes Delenn realize that in her efforts to stop the shadows, she's become fixated to the point of neglecting the Minbari. Now the damage that her actions did to their society are ripping it apart. They have a saying for such a thing on her world. Whoopsie doodle. Delenn returns to see the improvements to the war room and to explain to Sheridan why she has to leave for a while. But she leaves with an old observation she'd made, that what makes humans dangerous is their ability to unite disparate elements into communities. It makes him well suited for the hard part now, the rebuilding. But his efforts right now are all part of a distraction from the fact that his life now has a ticking clock. They haven't addressed that because of all the other things he's been doing, all the other things he's been keeping busy with. It's time for both of them to do what they need to do, especially not knowing if there's going to be a 5th season or not. Lines of communication is somewhat important, as most episodes are getting to be these days. I give it a stamp of fine, though if you like the eye candy of the fight, you might bump that up. but this is more about moving into the next act than anything else. And that's all right. Fine doesn't mean disappointing. You have to pull back the rubber band for a while before the slingshot can really let loose, after all. Next time, Garibaldi's world starts to change with conflicts of interest.
All